Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews. Again. There, that's better. Much more room for my dramatic gesticulating. Tonight, we will discuss this, Fledgling. It's a book. What's it about? Well, 6 by 9 inches. I stole that joke from my mom. It's about vampires, and it's by Octavia Butler. You do know who Octavia Butler is, right? Only one of the greatest minds in all of science fiction. In a genre classically dominated by white dudes, her success is noteworthy as a black woman, and it's impossible to separate her writing from her womanliness or her blackness. Everything she's done is full of deep and provocative social commentary. She often didn't like her writing being labeled as science fiction because she thought that meant people wouldn't take her literature seriously, but this is the sort of thing that science fiction should always be. A metaphor for real-world issues, a reflection of society, an examination of what it means to be human, and a challenge to improve our universe, especially when it comes to vampires. I mean, how many times have I had to say, if you don't want to hear about social issues, don't watch a show about vampires? It's kind of why they exist. And like all good vampire stories, this one questions what it means to be truly human, and even dares to provide some answers. Interestingly, Fledgling is considered the least gothic and dark of Butler's books. When she came up with this story, she was actually mired in a depression while working on an installment in one of her heavier apocalyptic series. And she wanted to distract herself, to focus on something lightweight and fun. So vampires! She'd written about sort of psychic vampires in the past, but Fledgling is her only true vampire novel. It was actually the last thing she ever wrote, and came out in 2005, only 6 months before her tragic and untimely death. She was only 58 years old, which is not old at all in terms of classic sci-fi, but Butler grew up in segregation America, where she was told repeatedly that black people can't be writers, especially women. And she defied those odds, went on to win multiple prestigious awards, continually breaking the boundaries of challenging racial and class divides. One of her famous quotes is, "I began writing about power because I had so little." Gotta wonder what she'd say about the state of our country now if she were still with us. Like most of her stories, Fledgling features a marginalized black female main character, which Butler wrote in part to subvert the white male vampire stereotype. But this vampire, Shori, isn't just a black vampire. She's the only black vampire. In Fledgling's world, the vampires are called Ina, and they are a separate humanoid species that have coexisted among humans since the dawn of humanity. They don't know if they evolved alongside humans from a common ancestor, or if they're descendants of an alien race that came to Earth over 10,000 years ago. They're all ghostly white and completely nocturnal, and always have been. They're unable to be awake during the day, and exposure to sunlight will kill them, so with the advance of technology, one family of Ina started genetic experimentation, combining their DNA with African human DNA to produce vampire children with dark skin who can withstand the sun and be awake during the day. Shori is the first truly successful result of these experiments, and she is 53 years old, but as Ina age much more slowly than humans, she looks like a 10-year-old girl. She's considered a child by Ina standards, but she does have the education and maturity of a 53-year-old person. Or at least, she did. The book starts with her waking up brutally injured with absolutely no memory of who or what she is. Complete amnesia. This is a conveniently useful literary tactic because as Shori learns information about her world, so does the reader, and the narrative doesn't ever have to contrive further reason than that for dumping on us all the exposition about how the vampires work in this world. And how they work is different. Of course, I would expect no less from the great Octavia E. Butler than brilliant imagination and originality of turning trope expectations on their heads and subverting vampires in a way that holds up an unflattering mirror to our society. Her books are famous for not shying away from ugly truths and difficult questions, and even though this is her lightweight and fun book, it's no exception. For instance, the book's told from Shori's first-person point of view, and the first thing she does after waking up is kill and eat a human who was trying to help her. Then, she soon after has sex with a grown man who wasn't a pedophile before he was affected by the seductive venom in her bite. And yet, she is presented in such an intimate and relatable way that the reader can't help liking and wanting to support her. Her amnesia leaves her with this logical and somewhat detached approach to the world, but her innate sense of morality and curiosity keep her from coming off as robotic. Even as she analyzes her instinctive reactions rather scientifically, she indulges her urges. She does things because they feel right, even though she can't remember if they are or not. To her, it feels right to have sex with a human adult because her underlying acceptable behavior of her Ina vampire nature makes it so. And the reader is challenged to contemplate the nuances of a society outside their comfort zones, to overcome cross-cultural hurdles. The Ina drink blood to survive, and every person they bite is affected, quickly becoming addicted to the pleasure of it. The relationship is mutualistically symbiotic, and each Ina keeps a group of human symbionts to feed from regularly, and because this exchange is sexual, it results in a permanent polyamorous relationship for the group. Shori's first new symbiont after she wakes up is a monogamous straight man, and he is deeply uncomfortable with sharing her with others, jealous and possessive. Gradually, though, he becomes more used to it, and by the end of the story, he's accepted their way of life. Not that he really has a choice, though. Once a human is fully bound to an Ina after enough bites, separation means death. As Shori comes to learn about how her vampire nature requires essentially permanent enslavement of humans, she struggles with the morality of it. The humans gain deep pleasure from their bonds, and the Ina offer them a good life, but it's with the loss of freedom. Shori makes sure that every future symbiont she gains joins with her completely willingly, knowing the entirety of the consequences. But is that even really possible? At one point, she talks about it with an older black man who tells her that when the Ina offered him a place among the symbionts, he ran as fast as he could because it sounded too much like slavery to him. But for months after, he couldn't stop thinking about them. Once he knew vampires existed in the world, he couldn't go back to pretending they didn't. The choice was gone before he even had it. He describes his ultimate decision to go back and join them as a relief. But is this a bad thing? We are so used to the idea that complete freedom and the highest possible degree of personal agency is automatically the ideal state of being. But Fledgling questions that. It offers the suggestion that instead there may be a greater potential for happiness when a person chooses dependence, at least of a specific mutually beneficial kind. The Ina and their humans live in a hybrid community that necessitates a flexible view of sexuality and gender and results in bonds between otherwise disparate groups. This theme of hybridity being the root of good family and communal life comes up a lot in Butler's works. And just to be clear, even though there are humans in this story, the Ina are the metaphors for us here. We learn from the Ina history that as the vampires became less alien through developing human emotional attachments and a sense of community, while meanwhile helping the humans lose their weaknesses such as vulnerability to disease and sexual possessiveness, they went from a sick, struggling species to a thriving one. By losing their weak characteristics and gaining stronger ones, the humans and Ina evolved and improved. The fact that the Ina need humans and cannot survive without them, not just their blood, but the companionship and physical affection they share, challenges any notion that the Ina are some kind of superior species. Contrast this to the real world, how humans have always largely viewed themselves as superior to all things. We are a parasitic species that has thrived off dominance and hierarchical relationships with ourselves and the world around us. Fledgling suggests that this is humanity's fatal flaw. This hierarchical thinking leads to intolerance, violence, and potentially the ultimate destruction of our species and the world we've dominated. Even though the apocalypse isn't looming in Fledgling like it is in much of Butler's other works, the Ina represent a way to avoid it by moving toward a symbiosis with ourselves and a true companionship with all other species. A progressive proposition. Besides just commenting on humans being historically bad for the planet in general, the metaphor goes deeper with the race dynamics of Shori's personal hybrid nature. Unlike the classic vampire, who is a monster who turns helpless humans into monsters with its bite, the Ina cannot transform humans. They are only born and raised as their own species. But they're still responsible for most of the vampire legends in the world. Humans still fear that they're contagious, that if they mix with them, they'll become vampires too. This is an allegory for the fear some people have that race is contagious, that if one associates with an inferior race, it demeans their own racial superiority. Racial intermingling is presumed monstrous. Like the concern that if people of color move into a white neighborhood, they're bringing the property value down. All the Ina are white, except for Shori. Most of them love and support her and are excited for what her human DNA and dark skin promise for the future of their people. Because her blackness was conceived as an evolutionary advantage, it does invert the common racist notion of blackness as a biological contaminant that leads to degeneracy. However, there are still some Ina who are hung up on their racial purity, and they see Shori as an abomination. This is an obvious parallel to white supremacy. Even though it's her human DNA they object to, not the color of her skin. She could be mixed with white human DNA supposedly and they would be just as bothered. But she really couldn't be, because the dark skin is what makes her able to walk in sunlight, and the whole reason she was mixed in the first place. Her blackness is crucial. Purity is arbitrary and meaningless, and racism is just racism. None of the Ina say human DNA is inferior. It gives Shori obvious advantages they all recognize. They're just upset that she's not pure, true Ina. But none of them can say why that matters. One of the racist Ina even lashes out, saying, if they mixed with human DNA, what's next? Will she give them fur? Tails? Yeah, black people have never heard that one before. The actual plot of the story is a murder mystery with a trial at the end. When Shori is about to make her case before the council, one of her Ina allies tells her, you, more than anyone, must show that you can follow our ways. You must not give the people who have decided to be your enemies any advantage. You must seem more Ina than they are. It's impossible not to draw the connection here to how people of color are constantly pressured to seem more competent and smart and calm than a white person to get the same respect. Or even how that is often expected of a woman to be given the same consideration as a man. The racist, ethnocentric Ina are also the ones who treat their human symbionts as less than people. One of them orders her symbiont to kill one of Shuri's as an intimidation tactic, and then is surprised when the other Ina find this detestable. To her, the humans exist for her use, not to be respected as persons. This falls into that self-destructive hierarchical real-world ideology that Butler admonishes, and all the characters with this outlook are punished by the end of the story. Shuri is the living embodiment of the hybrid community that makes up the ideal vampire lifestyle. Her blackness is visually symbolic of her closeness to humans on all levels, and she represents the future ideal of the mutualistic symbiosis. They won't just evolve the ability to walk in the sun, but will also develop tolerance, acceptance of diversity, and a desire to wield power responsibly. The book's title, Fledgling, is the word commonly used for a new vampire, one who has just been bitten and turned. Shuri is, in a way, a new vampire because of her amnesia, but vampires aren't made that way in this story. Instead, what the title really refers to are the fledgling ideas, the promise of development. As one of Octavia Butler's classic marginalized black female main characters, Shuri's difference from the dominant people is what gives her the potential to change the world. She is the embodiment of societal development, and it's actually her amnesia that provides the naivete it takes to question how things have always been. And this provokes a way to make the world better. It's wonderfully ironic how the people who were trying to destroy her gave her the amnesia in the first place. In trying to tear her down, they made her stronger. It's almost like Butler's trying to suggest that hierarchical ideology might lead to our own destruction. So watch out for that parasitic behavior, people. Though, if you do live to regret it, at least it won't be forever. Because you're all human. Right? If you're not human, call me.
Raise your hand, meagerest of fledglings.
Dramatic gesticulating. I hit the walls. Thank you so much to my wonderful, wonderful Patreon patron who requested this book review. You are so awesome. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, just click this orange circle P link thing and like my video, and click this one to subscribe to my channel, and leave me comments. I love comments. What are your favorite literary vampire books?